From a behavioral therapist explaining their experience with a kid who would eat his and his family's fingernails as snacks out of a box in his room, to a Redditor who got multiple botched plastic surgeries and now has to live with regret, to eating your own testicle while high on hard drugs, today we dive deep into Reddit's most disturbing medical stories. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I really like the Reddit videos that we make on this channel, and I was figuring like, what could we dive into that's kind of creepy? Honestly, medical stories. Anything from people that work in the medical field, to clients, to families of clients, to even, like I said in the intro, a behavioral therapist. And if you guys have any specific suggestions for what Reddit stories to go over, please let me know in the comments. And before we get into these stories, I do want to self-promo a little bit. I do live stream over on Twitch, twitch.tv/tuvington_, and I interact with you guys a lot. For example, I made a video going over my viewers' icks. It was extremely funny, by the way, when they refuse to shower and piss in bottles based on personal experience. But yeah, I'm live a lot more often, so if you want to go visit me, that would be cool. And now let's get into the Reddit stories. They nicked her bowel. She ended up dead. This first one started like something super common. A bad fall leading to a fractured hip, which leads to a trip over to the ER. You know, the type of thing that's supposed to be just scary in the moment. This specific person's family thought they were gonna be okay. I mean, it was just a fall. So they went in, and the surgery happened fast. Nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, they do these kind of procedures every day, right? So the surgery was done, and she went under a little observation, with everyone expecting the usual, you know, being a little bit sore, a little bit uncomfortable, and that had no one really worried. Then 48 hours later, everything completely flipped. So, what actually went down? Well, this part that I'm about to read to you is straight from the Reddit post that honestly felt rather chilling. My mother-in-law had a bad fall while on vacation in Florida and had to have hip surgery. During surgery, they nicked her bowels without realizing it until almost 2 days later when she started complaining of abdominal pain and her blood pressure started dropping. By then, she was already septic, went into a coma, and they couldn't save her. The hospital declared her death natural causes. We only know otherwise because my husband's family hired someone to do an autopsy before they cremated her body. Now, something really stands out from that quote. The fact that they were about to cremate her body without disclosing what actually happened. This is someone that just got ruined by a mistake and her death was about to go completely unquestioned? Anyway, so how does something like that even happen? How do you go from a routine surgery to death in 2 days? Well, it turns out that when your bowel gets nicked, like even just a tiny tear, your body can start leaking waste into your abdominal cavity. And when that happens, it doesn't scream at you right away. It's like this slow, silent burn where first comes peritonitis. That's basically your body realizing something's gone horribly wrong. Then sepsis. And once sepsis hits, it's game over. If you don't catch it early, that is. And here's what I find pretty wild. After that Reddit post blew up, other people started coming in with similar stories, like way too many. One person said this happened to their grandpa. Not even during a major surgery, just a routine cataract procedure. He was having some bladder issues, they gave him a catheter, and accidentally perforated his bladder. Just like that. He went into a coma and died a few days later. Another said their uncle had end-stage liver disease, and while they were draining fluid, a doctor accidentally nicked his bowel. They sent him home, no one had noticed. He then got worse real fast. Came back in a week later, barely hanging on. They quote-unquote saved him, but honestly, that was it. He apparently just wasted away in a hospital bed and was gone within 3 months. And then there's this other story that's just up there in terms of intensity. This woman's mother-in-law had sudden intense back pain. She went to the ER, they zeroed it down to a condition known as spinal stenosis. She got attended to, and then they sent her home. Hours later, she was back in worse shape. They did an emergency surgery and, well, you guessed it, it turns out she had a stomach perforation. But then here's the kicker. After that surgery, she started crashing again. Apparently, nothing was getting better. So they rushed her back in and found a second perforation. That's like a different one that the first surgeon had completely missed. And in that second surgery, all of her digestive organs, I'm talking about everything from her esophagus down, just flat out died. And they didn't even explain how that happened. Some people in the family thought the surgeon might have nicked the vena cava, which is this major vein, but no one knows for sure. All they told the family was she's got 12 to 48 hours left. She actually held on for a while longer, making it to 60 hours. Now I think it's incredibly sad and honestly infuriating how often this seems to happen. And not because the surgeries were high risk or complicated or anything like that. These seem like just regular people going in for standard procedures. Stuff that I think millions of people get done every year. It makes you think how many people have been quietly buried with no one realizing what actually happened to them. And I don't say all this to scare you, maybe a little bit, but more than that, it's just a real reminder to always ask questions. Botched breast surgery left her brain dead, then dead. This next one is really sad, not just because of how tragic it is, but because of how avoidable it seems to be. So, Emmeline Wynn, a 19-year-old girl from Colorado, went in for a breast augmentation procedure and it ended up costing her life. According to her parents, the surgery was meant to boost her self-image after finishing high school, just something she hoped would make her feel more confident and all that. But what actually happened is something no one saw coming, and honestly, the details are as heartbreaking as it gets. So, here's what we know. On August 1st, 2019, she was at the Colorado Aesthetic and Plastic Surgery Clinic in Greenwood Village for the procedure. The surgeon, Dr. Jeffrey Kim, was someone with credentials, online reviews, a seemingly trustworthy presence, and the anesthesiologist was equally good. It was Rick Meeker, who had worked in the field for years. Anyway, she was put under anesthesia in preparation for the surgery, but according to reports, right after the anesthesia was administered, before the surgery even started, they left her unobserved for 15 minutes. And obviously something went wrong. She went blue, went into cardiac arrest, and stopped breathing. This story is published elsewhere, but the version shared on Reddit says the real failure was not just the medical emergency itself, it was how the staff responded, or rather didn't respond after they found out what had just happened. She was allegedly left on the operating table for 5.5 hours before anyone at the clinic even called 911. That was according to her parents, and it's now part of a legal case that moved from medical negligence to a wrongful death lawsuit. Their excuse was that they were monitoring her. One Redditor who claimed to work nearby said, "This happened in the office directly across where I work at. Such a sad story that was easily avoidable as there is literally a fire/ambulance station not even 50 feet away from our office." Yeah, 50 feet away. I mean, help was really right there, but for 5 hours, they chose otherwise. Anyway, according to another Reddit comment, written by a CRNA student, someone training to be a nurse anesthetist, the breathing tube had reportedly detached from the ventilator after she was sedated. And this part is important because they add, "No CRNA school or medical school would ever state that it's safe practice to leave the room while the patient is under general anesthesia. This was gross negligence and is by no means reflective of CRNA standards." So basically, if that account is accurate, someone left the room, the breathing tube disconnected, and no one realized for a whole 15 minutes. Now Meeker, the nurse anesthetist involved in the case, had already been in legal trouble once before. According to the original post, they had been sued back in 2009 after another woman died during breast implant surgery. In that case, the patient suffered brain damage and did not survive. The case was settled back in 2012, and somehow, despite that, Meeker was still allowed to keep practicing. About that, another Reddit user wrote, "I'm just absolutely baffled at how this person isn't barred from practicing medicine. How could he do this to someone?" And honestly, I get it. Because the thing is, the girl never even got the surgery. The negligence started way too early. Not that it should start at any point. She literally went into cardiac arrest before anything was done. Now worse still, from that point, she remained in a vegetative state for 14 months. And it turned into 14 months of her family really hoping for a miracle, but unfortunately, on October 4th of 2020, she died from pneumonia after going into cardiac arrest again. This time at the nursing home she had been transferred to. What I find rather strange and honestly disturbing is how a licensed facility with a full medical staff could have allowed this to happen in the first place. Like the CRNA comment asked, how do you leave a sedated teenager alone for 15 minutes? How do you not notice a breathing tube has disconnected? And how do you not call 911 when there's an emergency response station literally right next door? I mean, that's not just upsetting, it's enraging. Just a stomach virus turned out to be a ruptured appendix. Alright, so this one comes from a legal advice subreddit, but honestly, it might as well be a medical thread named "How Did I Not Die?" Anyway, according to the OP, a Redditor named Chubbs323, they were 19 at the time and started having horrible stomach pains. They thought it was probably just a stomach bug, so they waited 24 hours. But things didn't get any better. In fact, they got worse. So like anyone would, they went to the ER. They got some scans done. They later clarified it was a CT scan, not MRI, and were told it was just a stomach virus. So nothing serious and therefore no big deal. They got sent home, and 2 days later, still in pain, they went to another ER, a completely different hospital, and apparently they got the same result. They were told once again that it was just a stomach virus. So they waited it out again, and this is where it gets wild. They go back to the original ER another 2 days later, now 4 days into this, and after another scan, they are told it's appendicitis. The appendix was already ruptured. Now the post was all good up to there, but then like you're about to see, things start sounding a little off. For instance, the Redditor says the damage to their stomach was apparently so severe that they couldn't even operate the right way, as in they had to wait to do surgery. Quote, "We had to get my appendix taken out 3 months later." Yup, 3 months. The reason that's off is because a ruptured appendix isn't something doctors usually sit on. Most people are actually rushed into surgery the second it's diagnosed. And I got all that from a bunch of people in the comments who were questioning it or just kinda confused. One user, Murky Development 6348, for example, argued, if it had ruptured and you went 4 to 5 days with it still in you, you would have almost died. You could have gotten septic or peritonitis. A different Redditor, Carl Panzram 1916, also raised doubts about the whole timeline. He said, "Appendicitis is pretty common and easy to diagnose. The fact that you went to 2 separate ERs and both missed it makes me think there's something you aren't telling us. Valid, I guess, because of the other inconsistencies too. I mean, the whole couldn't operate for 3 months thing is kinda hard to verify." But that aside, whether OP was lying or not, what made it worth including in this video is that a lot of people ended up agreeing that this happened to them or someone they know. For example, an account by the name Wooly Woolin said this happened to their nail tech's husband. 2 hospitals dismissed him and his problems, then his appendix ruptured, caused more damage and higher hospital bills. And another user, No Republic 8597, shared a story that's just like the last one. "My cousin almost died recently. He was sent home from the ER with kidney stones, came back with worse pain, and turns out his appendix had ruptured and he had gangrene." So the point is, it's not just one post. Apparently, misdiagnosing appendicitis or downplaying it is more common than you'd think. And that's truly just terrifying. Her eyes and face got worse with every surgery. So this one just shows how a medical procedure doesn't have to be life-threatening in order to leave someone deeply hurt emotionally, mentally, and even socially. Basically, it's from a Reddit thread from people who feel like they've been botched, what they're doing in the meantime. A Redditor by the name ShyBaby420_68071 shared their story. They start off by saying they're giving themselves time to heal physically and emotionally and trying to find a specialist who can handle revision surgeries. The reason? Well, they'd had multiple cosmetic procedures done, and according to them, each one caused different problems by different doctors. The first one was double eyelid surgery, official terms being upper blepharoplasty and ptosis correction. After doing so, apparently her left eye didn't heal correctly. The lid would not just retract properly, the crease was gone, and when the doctor tried to fix it not once, not twice, but 3 times, it ended up being, quote, overcorrected. Basically, they described their eyes as basically asymmetrical now, and way worse than before. He tried to fix it 3 times and just made it worse, resulting in an overcorrected look. I guess that one alone would have been enough to discourage anyone from ever going under again, but it didn't stop there. They also had a facelift to fix a botched chin liposuction from yet another doctor, and even though they wore the recommended recovery garment religiously, their skin never snapped back. They were left with loose, saggy skin around their neck and jawline, the exact thing they had paid thousands of dollars to fix. Then they talk about scars, literal ones, specifically around the ears. So even though their neck looks tighter, they say they've basically traded one issue for another, and now makeup is what's helping them cope. I hide behind my glasses as well because it's taken a toll on me. That part is just really sad and really honest. And what I find pretty interesting, even from the other cases we've covered, is how somehow normalized this kind of thing has become. Like, this person isn't talking about botched back alley work or some shady discount clinics. These are insured, credentialed, supposedly qualified doctors, but still that's the outcome. A puffy eye, loose skin, scarring, shame, avoiding mirrors, all that. And the worst part is how they can't do proper fixes right away. They're stuck in limbo. It had been 11 months at the time they posted, and we're planning to wait a whole year before trying again, hoping their skin settles enough to even consider going under once more. I plan to wait another year, treat my scars with scar tape, and hope things settle before going under again. And I think it's a real reminder, like I began by saying, that not all botched surgeries are dramatic ER cases or near-death Reddit horror threads. Some are slow burns, quiet regrets, people hiding behind glasses, feeling like strangers in their own skin, trying to hold on to some version of themselves that maybe doesn't even exist anymore. Kid that ate his nails as snacks. Alright, so this one will basically have us talking about one of the weirdest things I've read in a while. And I mean that in the most disturbing, please don't let this be real type of way. The story comes from a Redditor who goes by OMG Unicorns, and apparently they work as a behavioral therapist. So they've probably seen some things, but even they seemed extremely weirded out. So what actually went down? Well, they apparently had this client, a 9-year-old boy, who had a habit of biting and eating his fingernails. Which, okay, we can agree that's not super unusual. Maybe the eating part, but biting your nails, that's not crazy. It's what came next that totally flipped the situation upside down. According to them, the kid wasn't just biting the nails, he would go on and save them, specifically in a box in his room later for snacks. Quote, he stores his fingernails in a box in his room to save them for a snack later. Already feels like too much, but no, that wasn't even the worst part. What finally made the therapist want to, quote, vomit was what the family was doing. Apparently, when anyone in the household, mom, dad, sister, whoever, clipped their nails, fingers, or toes, they would hand the clippings over to the kid so that when he's hungry later, he can snack on them. Quote, so when he's eating nails from the box, they could belong to his mother, father, or siblings. And yeah, the therapist did talk to the parents about this, about how it wasn't okay and it was just enabling him. Now, they go on to say that it might be related to pica or some kind of nutritional deficiency, but as a behavioral therapist, they couldn't officially diagnose that or recommend treatments. They just knew that the kid had seen multiple doctors, had a bunch of tests done, and no one really stepped in to shut it down. And surprisingly, it's like this kind of thing might not be so rare after all. That's if the comments that followed are anything to go by. One deleted user dropped this bomb. I bite and eat my fingernails, and I'm 22, and I'll never stop. And no therapist or parent or girlfriend will ever stop me. They go on to describe how they were literally traumatized by nail clippers as a kid, said their stepmom used to cut their nails until they bled. Now they can't even hear clippers without freaking out. Total sensory overload. I'll literally use a knife before I use clippers, which is just, honestly, really sad. Another user suggested, what about a nail file? Those don't hurt. Anyway, from that, further down the comments, there was a different therapist talking about a similar yet different thing. A child client who stored and ate their own feces. Yes. Apparently the kid thought he was an alien and thought that eating his own poop would give him nutritional advances that regular Earth food wouldn't. He felt Earth food was poison and alien shit fixed that. We could not study his shit. Now, that comment thread had a bunch of other weird things kids did or do, but one more that stood out was this student therapist who said one of their professors once told a story about a kid who, brace yourself, used a craft knife to open his own scrotum because he was curious about what was inside. I'm not even going to comment on that one. Whether it's trauma, neurological conditions, or something else entirely, all these stories, at least for me, sounded more like, I don't know how we got here, but we're definitely here. The boy who lost his voice and fought to get it back. Okay, so this next one honestly left me kind of speechless, no pun intended. Not because it's the most violent or graphic story, but because how close it came to being permanently life-altering for a kid. So the post comes from a Redditor named JazzParrot108. And no, they're not a surgeon, but they shared a first-hand surgery story regardless. Here's what happened. Back in May of 2020, their 8-year-old grandson went in for what was supposed to be a routine surgery, just a simple cyst removal from his thyroid. Like show up in the morning and be home in time for afternoon cartoons. Because of COVID protocols, the kid's mom wasn't even allowed inside. She had to wait in the car during the whole thing. It was just regular hospital staff. About an hour into the procedure, the dad, Jazz Parrot's son, calls his wife, who was waiting in the car, and says something went wrong, very wrong, and that the kid was being rushed to a local hospital with a pediatric ICU. Clearly, whatever happened during surgery was so severe, the original team couldn't even handle it. Apparently, the surgeon messed up badly. Instead of removing the cyst, he cut into the kid's vocal cords and put a hole in his larynx. Yeah, it was that bad. An 8-year-old with a literal hole in his voice box. The kid was then sedated and put on a ventilator while the team scrambled to call Seattle Children's Hospital for help. The next day, he was airlifted there. A full transfer, totally unconscious the whole time. Now, the good thing is that the new team stepped up. Big time. By Friday, a top pediatric surgeon, someone who'd done this exact type of reconstruction only a handful of times in his entire career, took over. He performed a 6-hour repair surgery working from 5 to 11 p.m. that night. They had 3 specific goals for the procedure. 1, make sure the kid wouldn't need a tracheotomy. 2, make sure he could eat and swallow on his own. And 3, make sure he could still talk. And not just talk, but really talk. Because here's the rather brutal part. This kid apparently wanted to be a voice actor since he was 4 years old. But the good thing is that somehow this new surgeon pulled it off. He met every goal, the kid made it through. I mean, he needed some follow-up, sure, but he was okay. They would only have to scrape scar tissue off his vocal cords every few months until he hit puberty. What I find pretty wild is that, according to OP, the original surgeon knew once he cut in that it wasn't a cyst at all, it was a lymph node. But instead of stopping, he apparently just kept going. Probably why the family filed a malpractice lawsuit. But one of the more wholesome details is that the surgery that fixed things up is said to have only been done 5 times anywhere in the world, and only 2 of those were successful. This little boy was number 6 and a success. Surgery collapsed their lung. This next one is from the patient, and it's one of those cases where someone could be in obvious pain and still not be believed. According to the OP, a Redditor named Piper1871, it happened when they were relatively young, between 7 and 9 years old at the time, and had just had their very first port placement surgery. Basically, a port is like a long-term IV catheter that goes into the large blood vessels near the heart. It's often used for people with serious medical conditions, and in this case, Piper had cystic fibrosis, so their lungs were already in pretty bad shape to begin with. Now the surgery gets done, they wake up, and instantly know something's wrong. They lie there in serious pain, struggling to breathe, and not in an unusual post-op discomfort kind of way. No, more like full-on panic, can't breathe, everything hurts level of bad. The sad part, and rather unfortunately, the doctor apparently thought they were just being dramatic. I'm imagining they thought it was just a little kid overreacting. The doc thought I was just being a kid and not handling the pain very well. Good thing is that the nurse on duty actually knew them, so they knew how they actually acted. So they knew something didn't sit right. After watching them cry and gasp for air for a few hours, she convinced the doctor to listen. Finally, they ordered an x-ray. What they found was honestly terrifying. The surgeon had accidentally sliced through the lung during the port placement. The lung had collapsed, and the kid had been left trying to breathe with a chest full of air and no support. Quote, ended up having a tube put in my chest. What I find really chilling about this one isn't just the injury itself, it's honestly how close they came to being ignored, and that could have led to death. If that nurse had not known them personally and stepped in, they might have just ended up too damaged or even dead. Remember, our first case was something of that sort, an ignored patient that ends up with life-ending complications, and the comments clearly speak to that. One person, Benish Spore, pointed out something that kinda stayed with me. They said the scariest thing about surgical mistakes isn't always the mistake itself. It's the fact that once it happens, some doctors can be so reluctant to quote, look again, or even admit something went wrong. It's the very real possibility of running into an impassable reluctance to investigate it. They particularly emphasize that it can be really terrifying, especially for women, kids, or anyone from a marginalized group, because apparently there are so many stories of people begging to be taken seriously while their body is literally shutting down. Now back to Piper. The good thing is that they didn't let their experience stop them. They said they had over 10 surgeries in their life and only had one other major issue, but they did say something that really stood out to me. I make a point now to get to know my docs and the nurses. You also have every right to demand another doc to take care of you. I did that once. Honestly, that might be the real takeaway here. Advocate for yourself, speak up, or at the very least, make sure someone you trust is in the room with you. The emergency room consent dilemma. Okay, so this next one might just be the craziest ER story I think I've ever heard. It was shared by a Redditor named Ketch, who works in emergency medicine, and it all starts with a patient who came in as a transfer. Nothing odd until you hear why he was transferred. So apparently this guy was having sex while high on drugs, and somewhere in the middle of that he got super paranoid, like full psychotic break level. And then, I'm not exaggerating here, he literally tore open his scrotum. Yes, his ballsack. But then it somehow gets even worse. He went on, tore out one of his testicles, and ate it. According to OP, they were in their second or third year of residency at the time and just stood there realizing, yup, I'm never gonna see anything crazier than this. Then there's this whole other side of the story that's almost more disturbing, just in a totally different way. Because once this guy was stable, the urology team needed to take him into surgery. But since he was clearly high when he came in, they didn't want to move forward without consent. Totally normal, and it was OP's role to get consent from the patient's emergency contact, his mom. But when they told him that, he was very clear. He said under no circumstances did he want his mother contacted. And this is where it gets kind of fascinating from a medical ethics standpoint, because OP had to make a judgment call, and what they concluded was, if you're capable of understanding the situation enough to refuse to involve your mom while you're lying in an ER bed after eating part of your own anatomy, then maybe, just maybe, you're also capable of consenting to surgery. I figure that if you could identify that in this situation you didn't want your mother contacted, then you clearly demonstrated capacity to make complex decisions, which is actually kind of brilliant. Like, yeah, the guy might have been high, but he knew exactly what he didn't want. And that was his mom getting a call about that particular life decision. Anyway, I don't know, but this is just one of those stories that lives rent-free in your brain forever. It's everything from bizarre to gruesome, but also weirdly human. Like, buried underneath all the gore and chaos is a moment where this guy, even in the middle of a complete breakdown, still had the presence of mind to think, yup, no way can my mom find out about this. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like. If you guys think I earned your subscription, make sure to subscribe. If you want to watch more of my Reddit videos, there's a playlist somewhere on my channel. I'll leave the little iCard so you guys can click on it. And go follow me on Twitch. I'll be streaming there. And go check out the second channel where I post the clips in case you don't want to watch me live. I get a lot of you guys have real lives. You can go to the clips channel. It'll also be linked down below. With that being said, I will see you guys next time I upload.